Welcome to Aquarium Know-How. My name's Thomas, and in this video we're going over maintenance and care of your aquarium and everything you need to do and know to clean it. So what are we cleaning when we clean an aquarium? What we're doing is we're taking all the uneaten food, fish waste, and just general decaying debris out of the substrate. Anything the filter can't pick up and filter on its own is just going to sit at the bottom and create more problems for us in the future. We're also removing nitrates. I've discussed in other videos the nitrogen cycle, and I recommend you get really familiar with the nitrogen cycle and understand all the details of how it works. But the last step in the nitrogen cycle is the production of nitrates, and there's not anything easily we can do to remove the nitrates except for change the water out and replace it with fresh. So one big thing I recommend for all beginners is use your aquarium test kit, whichever kind you decide to go with, and test your water at least once a week. Twice a week would be better. Just test it all the time just to kind of get an eye for what your levels are. You'll be able to see if anything is changing, if you get an ammonia spike, or if your pH is fluctuating. It's just good to know when you run into problems what the tank has been doing up until that point. And there's many things that correlate together, such as ammonia spikes and pH level. A lot of people will see the pH spike or drop. And the last thing you want to do is just start adding things to the aquarium to try to correct a problem you're not completely understanding. More often than not, I see people saying their pH is spiked or dropped, and everyone recommends to add pH up or pH down or add wood or crushed coral and do all these different things, when the real problem is that they changed out their filter media recently and they basically crashed their tank, and the tank is recycling and adding different chemicals or products to the aquarium to try to fix that one aspect of the issue they're seeing is going to make the original or the main issue even worse. So if you have problems, don't add anything yet. Just be patient, and when in doubt, do a water change. Can't hurt it in most cases by doing a water change, and that's what's going to be generally recommended for any sort of issues that arise. So that being said, let's start with the routine maintenance. You're going to want to get yourself one of these. This is a gravel vac. They come in different brands, sizes, different types. They have some where you can get the fitting that will attach to your kitchen sink. It's got a valve you can switch to either add water or suck water out. Those make it really convenient. Usually I just use a bucket or just drain it out in the backyard. But what you're going to do is you're going to use this to gravel vac the gravel. Instead of talking about it, I'll just show you how it works. To get started, we want to create a siphon. Make sure you fill the tube with water, and then you can try to suck the water through the hose and start a siphon. Just keep in mind this has to be lower than the water level of the aquarium and able to maintain that siphon. The trick with doing it that way is not getting water in your mouth, and if you're cleaning your aquarium, it's probably not fresh, clean water. It's probably really gross, so getting water in your mouth is not a good time. So the thing I like to do, and I got to put this bucket on the ground to get it lower, put your siphon in the aquarium, make sure the tube is full of water, and now you're going to tip the top of it up and bring it out of the water, and watch the water level in the tube as it drains down the hose. You'll see it go down. Before it gets down to the bottom, put it back in the water, let it fill back up with water, and then you'll create a siphon. The water's draining in there now. Now, as long as the end of the hose stays below the water level here, you'll keep sucking the water out. So now vacuuming the gravel. What we're going to do is just gently sort of push this into the gravel, and you can see it's going to start sucking up all the fish waste. Uneaten food, dead leaves, pretty much anything. Now this isn't all debris. This is peat moss I've added in there that I pre-soaked just to get the visual effect. You can see how it works. So yours shouldn't be as dirty looking as this. Just go around the entire tank. Just sort of dig it into the gravel a little bit. Move along. Don't try to get it all. You never will. And you don't want to. There's also beneficial bacteria in the gravel that you don't want to completely remove all of it, because then you won't be able to maintain that nitrogen cycle. Don't worry about the fish getting sucked up into it. That's why this end is wider than the hose. That's why we don't just use this to go in there. The suction on this is going to be a lot stronger than when you put the end of it on. It sort of lessens the suction. So fish, if they do get up here, are usually strong enough to kind of swim around. You can just lift it up and they'll swim out. It's also not going to suck any rocks through it. It will suck up sand though, so if you have a sand bottom, you're just going to want to kind of hover this above the sand. The nice thing about sand though is that the debris is not going to filter down in between the nooks and the crannies of the gravel. All the stuff you want to get out is just going to settle on top, so you'll just kind of run this just over the top of the sand to suck out all the debris and waste. So after we get down to about 10 to 25% water, we are going to want to add new water. You're going to want to make sure the temperature of the water you're adding is the same as the temperature in the tank. You're going to want to make sure the pH is pretty close, and make sure you dechlorinate it or use the water conditioner to make sure you get rid of all the harmful chlorines, chloramines, heavy metals, any of that stuff that comes out of the tap water. You can add the water to it with a hose. You can use the buckets. Either way is fine. Just treat it with the water conditioner first and slowly add it to the aquarium. Another thing to consider is if you're going to bring the water level down lower than the intake of the filter, you're going to want to unplug the filter before you do it. If your heater is going to be exposed above the water, you might want to unplug that too. You don't want this heater to be on and running outside of the water. You'll burn it out, you could crack the glass and blow up. Generally, it's a good idea just to unplug everything before you do the water change. And since this is a newly set up aquarium for me, I don't have any algae to deal with, so I can't show you that. But if you do have algae on the glass, you can get an algae scraper or an algae scrubber or sponge, basically. Any sponge will work as long as it doesn't have any soaps or detergents in it. And most of that is always fine for glass. If you have an acrylic aquarium, make sure that you have an acrylic safe scrubbing pad. Some of the ones that are meant for glass will scratch the acrylics. One thing I like to do is take a razor blade, where you can do like an old credit card, and angle that on the glass, and you can scrape off all the algae up and down. Makes for quick work of it. Just make sure if you're using a razor blade, you don't get into the silicone seam. If you kind of go in just a tiny bit, that's fine. You just don't want to go too far in and start cutting the silicone and weakening the joint of the two pieces of glass. And I would recommend doing your algae scrubbing first. You don't want to drain the water and put fresh new water in just to cloud it up by scrubbing all the algae off. Also, when you're scrubbing the algae off, it's just floating, free floating in the water, and that's going to allow it to sort of colonize other areas. So you're spreading it essentially. So do your algae scraping first, then do your water change. You'll want to do a water change, I recommend once a week. You can, in some situations, do it once a month and be fine. It really just depends on what kind of stock load you have in the aquarium, how many fish you have, how big they are, what kind of fish are they. Some fish create more waste than others. How often are you feeding? All those things factor into how often you need to clean your aquarium. The one thing I say to go by is your nitrates, and that's where the test kit comes in handy again. Test your nitrates, see how quickly they come up. Once you get to about, some people like to have 0 nitrates. I tend to have 10, 20 parts per million. You can go up to 80, 100 parts per million, and some fish will be okay. Some people say that's absolutely not okay. I would say when you get to about anywhere from 10 to 40 parts per million of nitrate, definitely time to do a water change. So however quickly that happens for you is how often you need to do a water change or do any maintenance on your aquarium. Now, not as often as doing water changes, but semi-often we need to clean the filter out. This is going to get clogged up with all sorts of bacteria and scum and gross stuff. That detritus is what they call it. You don't want that to build up too much. Now on the box of the aquarium, they're going to say to replace this cartridge. The reason I don't like doing that is because this is where all your beneficial bacteria is. This is what's doing the bulk of your filtration. If you take this out, put a new cartridge in that's fresh, you've wiped out a significant portion of your beneficial bacteria. When you do that, you could start the cycling process over, so be careful with that. Also, don't change or clean your filter the same time you do a water change. Sort of stagger them. Do the water change one week, then wait a couple days, or next week do the filter cleaning. Because if you're gonna drain all the water out, gravel vac the gravel, and replace the cartridges or clean the filters, you're gonna wipe out most of the beneficial bacteria in there, because your beneficial bacteria grows on every surface. It's going to grow on the big rocks, the plants, the gravel, the glass, and in the filter. So if you clean all those at once, you're going to have problems. So what I like to do is I'll take this pad out and I will use the aquarium water. Don't use tap water. Tap water's got chlorines in it. It will kill your beneficial bacteria. You might as well just throw a new cartridge in if you're going to use tap water. So use good, well not good, it can be dirty, but use safe aquarium water when you rinse this. We're just going to put this in here, sort of rinse it around, scrub off any growth or detritus and scum off of there. This one's not so bad. Rinse it off fairly well. Don't be too aggressive. You're not trying to get it sparkly clean. You just want to get the extra stuff off. And then you pop that back in. You can also take the filter off, dump out any muck that's in the bottom. You can take a toothbrush in there and sort of clean that out. Every so often you're going to take this apart. So pull the motor section off of the filter, pull the tube off. Then depending on what kind of filter you have, there'll be some way of getting into the impeller. So in this case, pop this little piece off, and down inside here is your impeller. Now, you're gonna want to try to clean out if you got any junk inside there, some sort of pipe cleaner brush or something. Just make sure you don't have any buildup of anything in there. There's a shaft in there that this will slide down onto. And basically, you just have your little impeller, and this is the magnet part. Inside this motor is another electromagnet, and as it gets powered, it causes this to spin. So while it's spinning in there, you don't want a bunch of stuff in there that's inhibiting its rotation. So just kind of clean off any algae scum in there, and you just pop that back on the shaft and put it back together. It's pretty easy. Once you've done it once, it's a lot easier. Cleaning the motor, you may not have to do as often as cleaning the inside and the filters, filter media, but it will extend the life and the performance, and a lot of times the noise level of your filter. So then you just put it back together. Make sure you got all your pieces back the way they're supposed to go. Be careful, do not turn this on while it's empty. You want to fill it with water first. I'm just gonna dunk it down in there. And we're all set. You may not need to gravel vac every time you do a water change. Sometimes you can just change the water and not have to worry about vacuuming out every single time. Just depends on what kind of fish you have and how much waste they produce, how often you feed. Again, all that contributes to your maintenance. But you definitely do need to do regular water changes. That's probably the most important part. As for how often you clean the filter, some people say once a month. That's probably the general rule. I have filters that go 6 months without cleaning. It just depends on your variables. And so that's basically it. You can wipe the glass off and clean off drips and the mess you've made. If you do clean the glass, don't use an ammonia spray. Or if you do, make sure you don't get any of it in the aquarium, but I would advise against using that. It can be very toxic to fish using any kind of Windex or cleaners like that. If you want to lessen the amount or how often you have to clean the tank, don't feed quite as much. Fish can go, you could probably feed fish once a week and they'd be perfectly fine. Don't feed 3 or 4 times a day, only feed them as much as they'll eat. Maybe once a day. That will limit the amount of debris you have down there and the quickness at which the water gets fouled up. When it comes to algae, same thing with the food. Don't feed as much. Algae eats that stuff too. The more excess nutrients you have in the water, the more likely you are to have algae. Also, keep the lights down to less than 10 hours a day, 8 to 10 hours, sometimes even as low as 4 to 6 hours. Less light, less nutrients means less algae. So if that was helpful for you, leave me a like. If you have any questions or comments, leave comments below, and subscribe for more videos. Thanks.